Waiting for my fingers to thaw out. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Deschutes County Historic Landmarks Commission meeting for February 3rd. It's 5:37, and we'd like to call our meeting to order. We have our first item on our agenda tonight. It has to do with meeting minutes. We've actually got two visits worth. We have the November 18th and the January 6th minutes. Do we have any approval of those minutes from any of our commissioners?
I was there for the November, but not the January meeting. So I'm not sure if somebody was here for both. Can move them along.
I'm the opposite. I couldn't find the January 18th, or I'm sorry, the November 18th ones, but I did review the January 6th ones, and those look good to approve.
So each of you could nominate one of them, I suppose.
I nominate November.
Okay. And I nominate January 6th meeting minutes for approval.
I'll second yours, Rachel, as you second mine.
I will. All right. Our next item is any public comment that we have. Anyone in the online waiting room? Nope. All right.
Maybe try it again. Commissioner Schmidling and Ashley, we're going to try to just elevate you to panelist. Again, if you see a little pop-up.
Is that on the screen?
And if something weird's happening.
Yeah,
So.
because I only see Chris and Mark.
Yeah, because I think oh, here comes Eli. Oh, yes, wonderful.
Oh, good.
Thanks, everyone. As always, thanks for your patience.
Thanks to you who actually went.
Oh, DES, that must be Dennis. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Action items tonight. We have a few things. I know we have an update for the DLCD Goal 5 cultural area rulemaking. And then we'll follow with our CLG grant discussion, which was what we had our special January 6th meeting for. And then we'll do a check-in on our subcommittees.
Great. So I'll start with the DLCD Goal 5 Cultural Areas Rulemaking Update. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner. Yeah, okay. So what we've been, as you all know, I've been updating you over the last couple meetings about this process. These rules were adopted, and I'm just presenting the changes or anything significant. Some things are a little less significant than others, just to give you a sense of what was adopted. I did also include the redlined rules attached to this memo. They're a bit of a beast to read sometimes, but I just wanted you to have it kind of the direct text for your reference. As a reminder, these rules will ultimately be effective January 1st, 2026. So in about a year, a little less than a year. And I'll get into a little bit of the timeline at the end of this. And I think actually the timeline is sort of the most important thing with respect to our activities here. Not too many significant changes were made. Not anything that would really drastically affect how our HLC operates. They divided it into a few buckets, issues that were discussed at the hearing, issues raised since the hearing, and just other edits. So I'm going to just briefly go over these. And again, the the details and the specific language is in that attachment. So looking at number 1 in the memo, the relationship of the rulemaking to the Eastern Oregon solar siting, they removed this reference because the solar siting rule is not yet complete. This is not really relevant to what we'll do, probably, but I'm just noting it anyway. Next is an optional local protection for archaeological resources. The rule clarified that a local government may require pre-construction surveys of areas identified as having a high likelihood of containing archaeological sites. And this includes both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And there was some discussion about that in the past. I believe the previous version was just looking at Indigenous stuff, and they decided to sort of widen that. So their example was a Chinatown or something like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Indigenous. In addition to the protection measures that are already established in this rule. Basically, what this is saying that although the archaeological resources are already covered by a state process and a state list, a local government can also choose to take some things on their own and have a pre-construction survey in an area that they think might have a resource. The local government can require limitations on that, on any development there, but that has to go through what's more like the standard Goal 5 process, going through an EC analysis, which is an analysis of the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences. It's part of any sort of any Goal 5 analysis. When you identify, you say, we have this resource, we've deemed that it's important, but how is it important in relation to other things? And it's a process that we go through with wildlife, with other things. Yes. So essentially, this is providing local governments the option to do this extra on top of the state processes. That's kind of a mouthful, but I'm happy to talk it through more if anyone would like to. Moving on to number 2, issues that have been raised since the hearing. Previously, the requirement was that applications under any of this rule has to be processed legislatively. They nixed that, and you can do it either legislatively or quasi-judicial. It's just sort of a procedural issue. Each local government processes things differently, depending on if it's one particular property or a group of properties or a big area. So they kind of remove that restriction. Deference to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. The language clarifies that the process must be completed before a local government can defer to that decision. That's kind of logical. If the decision's not done, you can't refer to it. So that makes sense to me. Next one, recognition of significant quarry sites. Protections for landscape features shall not have the effect of limiting mining within the boundaries of a significant aggregate site in which mining is authorized by the local government. So in other words, if we're trying to identify a landscape feature of significance, it does not supersede an active and approved mining site. So that's just giving an order of preference and priority. The timeframe for tribes responding to notice has been clarified. This was a little bit confusing, but basically, the idea is that the local government informs the applicants if they're submitting an application that affects a historical area of any responses received. If they're received in time from a tribe or from someone else, it can be included in the first hearing. This seems very logical to me. They just, I guess, had to spell it out in that, any information is run through the process and run through the people who are to receive notice, in other words, the tribes. So they'll know what's going on throughout the process rather than just at the end. And again, these are a lot of very kind of small details that until we deal with it, it's not going to become relevant. So it does seem a little abstract at the moment, but I think these are all good changes. Owner consent. This was made consistent with the statute. In other words, local governments must allow a property owner to refuse consent to the designation of a landscape feature as a significant cultural area if the State Historic Preservation Office has determined that the landscape feature is eligible for listing on the National Register. This one's a little confusing, and I went back and forth with a DLCD representative on this. The only, I'm trying to explain this. Local governments, the only way that you can refuse consent is if if this property has been nominated or eligible for a national register, but they haven't yet been listed. So it's a very tiny sliver of properties. And a property that has been nominated or is eligible for listing on the national register isn't necessarily a landscape feature.
Yeah.
But if there's a very tiny confluence of where that apparently can occur, and this is what DLCD said, and for whatever reason, those people are allowed to refuse consent, and that's it. We'll, as I said, we'll deal with that when we get to it. But there's some other things about consent as well later on. Other edits, remove the statute definition of significance and added that all archaeological sites are considered significant Goal 5 resources. That just clarified and simplified those definitions. Otherwise, they were a little bit at cross purposes. Landscape features inventory by an application. Now, this is another consent part. A local government may not require consent to process the application, but private property interests are considered in the EC analysis that ultimately determines the protections. So in other words, if someone has deemed they want to nominate a landscape feature to become a Goal 5 resource, unlike when you nominate a building or something like that, you don't need owner consent, which I think is interesting, I guess, because it's a landscape. It's not necessarily owned by one person or anybody or what have you. You don't need consent, but once they're deciding what those protections may or may not be through this EC process, that's when they take into consideration that it's owned by someone. So that's going to be if they're saying, we don't want to have, if one of the options is to completely restrict development, and you're weighing these interests, you say, well, but one of the things are that it's privately owned, and that's something to consider in that decision. So in other words, the aspect of it being privately owned comes later in the process, but they can't stop the process from happening. It just becomes one more factor in that decision-making of what protections, if any, are going to be utilized. It took me a long time to wrap my head around that, so I don't, but I might be slow. But it differs in that if I have a historic house, the only person that can make me apply for a designation is like, I have to give consent.
Right.
This is not the case with landscape features, but they do take the fact that I own it into consideration later. Does that make sense? Kind
I
of?
think so.
It's a lot of words, I realize. And then there's just some housekeeping edits, just clerical punctuation and stuff like that. So that was a lot. Ultimately, it doesn't significantly change the organization of this rule, where they're just, bolstering the notice, the required notice to the tribes and sort of that feedback loop of how things might affect them. So overall, it's good. And these are a lot of like small details. What I think is the most important is the timeline. As I noted, the rules are in effect January 1st, 2026. In that time, as I think I noted before, DLCD is going to issue guidance. So basically helping us figure out how to implement all this. So their timeline, which is fairly general, they're going to provide model language for amending the notice procedures in the spring. So they'll give us a model language that we will include in our documents. They'll give us model language for information provided to applicants in the spring as well. And this was along the lines of, on every application, saying something to the effect of disturbing known archaeological resources is against the law, that type of thing. But they will give us that verbiage to use, which is helpful. Best practices for communicating with tribes. And this is interesting. They're proposing to give this to counties or to local governments in the fall, as well as avoiding best practices for avoiding impacts to cultural areas. So I think, we've had a lot of discussions within this group, especially in light of kind of CLG grant task of, how are we going to reach out to the tribes? How are we going to do that outreach? How are we going to link up? And I think this will provide some guidance to help shape how our approach will be, instead of just us kind of coming in guns blazing, like, I think this will give us a little bit of just guidance in the most appropriate way to do it, when, how much, that type of thing. So I think that'll be really helpful. And I'll kind of touch on that when we get back to the CLG grant discussion, because that'll be something that we can use some staff time for. So that's their timeline. If it changes, obviously they'll let us know. For the tribes will provide lists for each city and county. Well, the Legislative Commission on Indian Services will do that, but, and I alluded to this in the previous meeting, just to figure out which counties and cities want notice about what from whom. So obviously, tribes have limited capacity to process all their mail, as we all do. They'll decide what kind of notices they want and don't want, and so we will adjust our procedures based on that information. So that's kind of a lot, but hopefully it's digestible. Does anyone have any questions that I can do my best to answer?
So there would be nothing that the county needs to be implementing until at least January of next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the process for, if we have to modify our code a little bit or our applications, we'll wait till we receive that guidance. And then if we do have to amend our code, which we may, that's a standard legislative process that I would involve the HLC with, obviously. And then the goal would be to have everything kind of ready for January 1st. Not that we necessarily anticipate an onslaught of applications, but you want to have everything in place and be able to answer questions and all of that. So this year will be kind of just information gathering and figuring out our next steps.
And getting familiar with it in general.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anyone else?
Mark has his hand raised.
Oh, you do. Mark.
Hey, in terms of the landscape feature nomination, I mean, was there any conversation about the tribes being proactive in nominating certain landscapes? The example I'm thinking of is for the solar sighting rack, we get quite a bit into that Fort Rock area where there's been significant solar development, and there's repeat conflict. I wouldn't say conflict, but there's repeat issues about resource areas. I mean, is there that kind of expectation where they'll be outlining areas of specific concern over the next year?
I was not aware of that in any of the rulemaking process. That might be another conversation that they're having, but because this is just really about writing the rules. They didn't talk about specific scenarios per se. I think it's up to the tribes. Some tribes might have a lot of capacity to do this and move things forward, and some might be kind of waiting. So I think it just depends on the individual situation, but there wasn't any guidance or nudges in what I saw in the materials that I saw.
And just so I understand, when you're doing the landscape area nomination, right, is it duplicative of the SHPO review process where they're going to identify potential resources in the ground and then require an archaeological survey, or is this something different?
Something different.
Okay.
So I don't know if you remember, totally fine if not, that little diagram that I had that I stole from DLCD last time. So the archaeological stuff is sort of one column, and that's primarily a state process. We're just increasing notice. And then the landscape features is another process. And the landscape features is what's really the new thing. It's a new type of Goal 5 resource, basically. So we have our standard historic resources. We have all of our other Goal 5 resources that are not related to historic stuff. So now landscape features are a new category. So that can be nominated by a tribe or not a tribe or anyone, but that's separate from the archaeological resources. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay. I like a thumbs up. Thanks. Those are good questions. So yeah, we will just keep everybody apprised as we get information from DLCD. That's that update.
Yeah, that is that's a good, what is it, TLDR?
It's a
Summary.
lot. I definitely had to double check with
Yeah.
LCD to say, am I understanding this right? But I think I do. And she
Yeah.
said I did. So yeah. So shall we move on to?
Yeah. To our CLG grant discussion? Yep.
All right. Once again, Tanya Saltzman, I remain. So the CLG grant discussion, we had I thought, a great meeting last month to talk about tasks and potential projects. And they've turned those all around in a little spin cycle to provide this menu of options. So as a reminder, the application deadline, which is something that staff takes care of, is February 28th, and we'll hear in April if we get it. I will preface this to say, we don't know what's happening in the world of grants. Ultimately, while this grant is given to us by the state, it's ultimately federal money.
Mhm.
So for a couple days, we thought it wasn't happening, and then a day we thought it might happen. So we're going to proceed as if it's happening. That's all we can do. We can hope for the best, and it's sort of a life lesson at this point, but we're just going to go ahead and we're going to see what happens. So with that, the request can be made for up to $16,000. Usually they're between 11 and 16. It depends how many governments, CLGs apply. It's non-competitive, so everyone does win. We will not be rejected for this grant, which is great. As you all know, a one-to-one match is required. That match is usually staff time, my time, just in kind, not anything we are writing a check for. Sometimes we do volunteer time as well. The rest of the timeline is outlined here. I don't need to go over those, but we basically have from roughly April of this year to mid-July of next year to complete the grant tasks. And Emmy Shoup from Sisters was unable to attend tonight, but they've kind of given their blessing to what we've allocated here for Sisters. She had something come up, so just to let you all know that. So I'd like to just go over what we landed on, and I'd like to hear feedback, if anything. Basically, what we're concerned about with is the reimbursable, hard costs that we will be reimbursed for, hence reimbursable. And the in-kind staff time match will follow. So we will adjust that accordingly. They are in certain buckets, as you'll see in that section, but the thing that will drive the ultimate total of the grant is obviously the reimbursable stuff. So I heard last month that training would be a really great thing. And I think we all agree that that would be a great thing. The Oregon Heritage Conference was the thing that Curry Gill from the State Office of Historic Preservation recommended. It's also the one that's within the state, so it's a little bit less expensive and logistically easier. I've put together some estimates on costs here. Roughly $1,000 per person, give or take. I guess what I'd like to know, and last month, everyone expressed interest. If everyone is still interested, and I know everyone can't necessarily commit to those dates in 2026 right this second, because that's very far away. But my main concern is that if I commit, money for 9 people and then only 6 can go, we do have to figure out what to do with that extra money. And that is, dollars, spendable dollars. We can do it, but I'd like to get as precise as I possibly can. So I guess I'd like to open it up to see if anyone would like to go, would not like to go. They know they can't do it. If in theory we could send everybody, it is possible for us to ask for that money. It is April 29th to May 2nd in Woodburn. And these are just some general costs that I've put together based on guidance from our county finance folks. It's 3 nights away. This is assuming people would drive their own cars. There is always an opportunity to carpool. I know this is like a lot of logistics way in advance, but this is how we do it. If you drive your own car, you do have to sign some things with the county, but just to make sure you won't sue us or something. But so first of all, I'd like to know about people's interest. I'd like to reiterate that. I see a question from Mark.
I missed the last meeting, so I may have missed key points of the conversation on this, but I mean, for me, this far out, it is pretty hard to know. So my other question would be, if we lack our whatever we propose in terms of our numbers at the key date to be able to attend the actual conference. Is this something where staff could go in attendance if that was their desire?
In theory, yeah. I mean, we can also plan for staff to go. I mean, it can be staff and commissioners at the get-go, but yeah, weirdly, I sort of already know that I cannot go, which makes me sad, but I always have a commitment the first weekend in May. But that's just my personal problem. But yes, it is interchangeable between commissioners and staff. And I know Emmy from the City of Sisters expressed some interest as well. And again, this is not me intending to lock you all down for this next date, because life happens. I completely understand. But if you have an interest, I would like to know that, or if you know that you don't have an interest, I would like to know that. Does that make sense? Maybe we'll just go down the list and just hear people's thoughts so I can. Commissioner Harding Jones, I think we're getting some feedback.
Oh, well, I would be interested, yes.
Okay. I think we have got audio feedback as well as actual feedback about the commission.
Well,
so
I'm surprised you don't hear these dogs in the background.
something. Okay, so Commissioner Harding Jones, you would be interested? Yes?
Definitely. Yes.
I would also be potentially interested.
Okay. Commissioners Ashley or Schmidling? Last time, I think you were both interested. Okay. Thumbs up. Okay. Thanks, Commissioner Schmidling. Commissioner Ashley, are you there? There he is. Hi. Thumbs up. I like it. Okay, and we don't have Commissioner Cyphers here, but I can ask her separately offline. And Chair Stemich?
Tentatively, yes. I will throw in that would be the first Friday, which sometimes is the kickoff for Preservation Month. So depending on volunteer activities and stuff going on and planning, but it all depends on how exciting things are next year.
Right,
But yes.
this is very helpful. And again, I'm not going to hold anyone to it, and we can always figure something out if we have too
Yeah.
much or too little. And if someone has to decide to not go, we'll deal with that when we come to it as well. So thank you. Thank you for this. I think it looks like a great conference. Think Currigo recommended it highly. And I don't think we've had the opportunity to do this in the past. So I'm excited for you all. Great. Thanks for that. I will do the math on that and figure out kind of how that trickles down to all the rest of the stuff. But other items include City of Sisters wants to update their walking tour brochure. So that includes updates to the content as well as some printing for roughly $1,000. They want to have $250-ish for Preservation Month activities or materials and or support for Three Sisters Historical Society. Sometimes it's just about kind of buying them, tape or something, and that's helpful as well. I'll note that for those of you who were at the last month's meeting, Sisters had kind of some larger ideas, but they did pull it back, and I think wisely so, because they just really want to reassess the capacity that staff has, as well as just the general appetite for these activities. And I think in the abstract, there's of course a ton of appetite, but in terms of really when the rubber hits the road, they just wanted to make sure, if they do a strategic plan, is this going to be valuable, et cetera. So this year they're going to just stick with this slightly lower ask, which I think is perfectly reasonable. So that's their story with how it's changed since last month. Annual membership to the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. We are currently a member of that. I forwarded you all a webinar invite. This was this past week. I sat in on it virtually. Lori did, Commissioner Christopher. I don't know if anyone else did. It was pretty cool. It's interesting to see what other towns that are not Oregon do. They talked about Burbank, California, doing a survey about their kind of post-war neon signs in their downtown. It was stuff like that. That was kind of interesting. So yeah. So that is a summary of the hard costs. Does Does anyone have any thoughts or questions? Observations?
Those all sound like reasonable things to me.
Great. I appreciate that. And then, so I'll move on to the staff time estimates, and this is kind of the softer stuff in terms of we can be a little bit more flexible. I've allocated some money to grant administration. That's just something we always do. The City of Sisters wanted a little bit of staff time to do their walking tour brochure stuff, their work. Review and compliance, that's the category that SHPO gives it. So that's a combination, and this is primarily my staff time, but administrating the HLC, so kind of preparing for these meetings, just making sure we have agendas, that type of thing. And I also put in Goal 5 cultural area rulemaking tasks. I know there's been a lot of discussion about that, and there's a lot of interest. And just like I alluded to in the previous agenda item, just the coordination and figuring out what we're doing, how we're doing it. Once we get that direction from DLCD, I think we can allocate a decent amount of staff time to that with the commission's help. That looks sort of like a high number, but we can always balance that a little bit with other things. And that's not really for the commissioners to worry about so much. That's kind of my math problem to deal with. So, but that is one of the things that I anticipate we would spend some time discussing, which, you know, per the commission's interest. Per Commissioner Hording Jones's ideas from last month, website upgrades, story map upgrades, adding in a couple of the resources that are not currently on the story map. Those are great ideas, and that would take staff time. So we're just allocating some money to that, as well as Preservation Month assistance, if any. So that can all be, that's all in the same category as education. So that can all be, you know, it can ebb and flow according to what interests we have, and we can be pretty flexible with that. But I think the website upgrades and the story map updates are a great idea and very doable and very tangible. So I appreciate that effort, and we can get input from commissioners as needed, as desired. If people want to help with that, they can. So that's where we landed with the staff time and the match. Any questions or discussion about that?
So how
Well
would,
done.
Thanks.
so
Appreciate that.
when you send in the proposal for the amounts, so obviously the first four are definite asks, and then the remainder, would you just take a portion of each one, or just, I mean, how do you have to put that on the application?
It's kind of outlined the way I did it. They make us put the match in buckets of review and compliance, grant administration, education, that type of thing.
okay.
And then we just put a total amount. I don't recall if we give them our hourly rates at this point or just in the reimbursement.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a fairly, the application's a little more complicated than it maybe should be for that type of stuff. But we give them a little bit of language on it, and then just put those numbers in to correspond to the reimbursables. They have a whole magic website that
Magic.
makes sure that the math adds up. So, yeah. And, you know, in the past, we've had to adjust, and I just work with SHPO, and they are very flexible with not lessening the grant total or increasing it. I was about to say greatening,
Mhm.
but I don't think that's a word. But just in terms of reallocation within that total, they're very good about, and they're very flexible about.
Oh, okay.
We usually have to give them some alternates, some ideas in case something doesn't work out. So I'll probably give them, you know, if 2 people suddenly can't go, we'll give them some options for that.
Mhm.
So the next steps, if everybody, and I'll give time for discussion if needed. I'm going to go to the county commissioners we have to, as part of the process, request permission to apply for the grant. If it's over, well, actually any grant that has any type of match, we have to get their blessing. So I'll do that in the next couple of weeks, and then I will submit the application, and then I will report back with our award. Does anyone have any questions or items or thoughts?
When would the update come then? After
They let
the
us
notice?
know it says April 1st. Sometimes it's a little bit after that. but we'll know then. And then it takes a few weeks. We have to get stuff signed. And so it's effectively, I believe the tasks can start April 1st, even if we don't have everything signed. They let us start the grant tracking and stuff
Mm.
then.
Okay, so you'd know, definitely would know by our next meeting.
Yes.
In May.
Yeah, and I'll certainly send out an email when we hear. So, yeah. Well, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts on this, and you know, I know it's not a ton of money, but it is exciting stuff. I think the training is really great, and I think there's opportunities to do some real stuff, and it's thanks for thinking about it. And with that, that is all I have for the grant discussion.
Excellent. Does the National Alliance for Preservation, do they do a lot of webinars? Was that one last
They
week?
do one every couple months, I think.
Oh,
like
okay.
free one. So I will forward anything I get because we all get to do it for free.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And they're pretty good. And if you have, I know for AICP for planners, we get credit. AIA might get credit as well. If you're looking for continuing education
Yeah.
credits.
Usually they're very picky
Yeah,
about that stuff, but
people were popping their numbers into the chat. I do remember that. So
interesting.
I can follow up. But they're so far I've attended 2 of their webinars and they've been very well done.
Good.
Yeah, I highly recommend them.
All right. Is there any other questions from commissioners on the grant projects?
No, awesome job, Tanya. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Hudson.
So our next task or discussion is our subcommittee roundup. And we had four topics: the cultural resource work, wildfire and preservation issues. We're looking for an update also on Camp Abbott, which I don't think we talked about very much
No.
last time, or if at all. And then general public awareness and outreach.
I will just note quickly that Commissioner Cyphers thought she would be able to make it today. She was traveling and she got stuck.
Stuck.
Not stuck, but just unable to attend. So she sends her apologies if anyone was coordinating with her about her subcommittees. She also noted that she was going to reach out to the chair about Preservation Month stuff. This was 20 minutes before the meeting, so she probably hasn't done it yet. So she is on it, but she has not yet been able to do that. And Commissioner Christopher was unable to attend as well. She might have some conflicts in the future, so I'm not sure. We're going to try to figure that out over the next little bit of time. So she's unavailable to participate in the subcommittees for tonight, at least.
Okay. Okay. Well, and on the cultural resource work, I know that Mark and I haven't really done any other follow-up besides the original discussion that we had last time. It feels like a lot of that work was somewhat tied back to the discussion earlier on, goal 5 and the DLCD information, but I know this is just something we want to keep on the calendar. If we just do a check-in every time we meet as a commission for updates. So I don't know, Mark, was there any other follow-up that we had from our original discussion in November?
No, and it was honestly my bad. I was sick for the better part of January, but yeah, no, nothing new. I mean, we've been kind of tracking this on the solar rack, but I think really it's to Tanya's point, we're in kind of a waiting game now that the rule's been passed, both as to what could be implemented, but also kind of what independent actors who may have an interest in nominating things could come forward and doing. Beyond that, I mean, the conversation would just be like whether or not we would want to do that, which I'm not sure we do.
All right.
That makes sense.
Mhm. And then on wildfire and preservation issues, Eli's on, yes. Did Eli, did you and Lily have any further discussion? I think Eli's
Nope. And you know, you don't have to have,
No.
you don't have to have
check
something
in.
every meeting. So we just want to keep.
I think
this
it's
as
best
you
to
said, as
keep it on here so that we
Yeah.
don't let it fall through the cracks,
Yeah.
just, yeah, as a general check-in, yeah. So. And then I don't know if, Camp Abbott, I don't know if, Lori's been able to, it doesn't sound like she's been,
I don't think she-
had the opportunity yet, yeah. And I know we didn't really broach that in November. However, on the public awareness, education issues, or education and preservation month, I literally just sent out an email to our basic, our core group of volunteers and for the past decade or so that have been instrumental in getting Preservation Month up and running. And I already got there's already a couple of responses back, so everyone's genuinely interested in getting like a little kickoff meeting going for Preservation Month. And this is typically when we starting to discuss it, and then
Never too early.
yeah, I mean, some years when we know we've had we have quite a bit in play, we'd start those discussions in January at some point, but we're not late by any means. And typically it feels like everything starts coming together sort of the beginning of April. And then there's in the past, there's been a couple people who have done a really good job with organizing posters and having our full list of events, which usually it's the Deschutes Historic Museum that's put that together, and they have an actual subpage on the museum's website that you can go to for the whole list. So they start publishing that sometime in April. Typically when it looks like, we start getting all those events kind of culminated together. So, and I would like, I didn't copy, Commissioners Ashley or Cyphers yet on that. I wanted to see what the core group's availability was for meeting. And it looks like, tentatively we might have a noon meeting. We'll try to get it, at a time when maybe people are on their lunch breaks. Either next Wednesday or the following Wednesday. So, yeah, and if it looks like, if Eli or Lily can join us, for that from the HLC, I think we'll still be pretty good if that's myself. And Eli would be the voting,
Yes.
2 voting, and then the 1 ex officio, which I think we can manage pretty safely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
So-
we've, that's
Okay.
okay. It's also possible that if, and I'll have to go back to my notes, but with the whole quorum thing, because I know it's kind of a pain sometimes when you're trying to
Mhm.
actually get things done. But if more other commissioners do want to participate as well, on kind of whether it's the email list, that's a huge list, or meetings, we can talk and we can try to figure it out. I know the Board of County Commissioners has this like separate website that lists meetings they all might be at. It's sort of like this side meeting. So I'm wondering if we can kind of do the same thing on the HLC page, just to sort of document it so it won't become a quorum legal issue, and will allow you to do the things that you want to do without, plotting anything.
It's only, I'd say our coordination type meetings, there's maybe 3 of them.
Right.
And sometimes they're virtual. I mean, we're
Yeah.
trying to get something in person this time around. But there's also been just email check-ins.
Right.
Too, just for random updates. So we're pretty minimal, all things considered.
Yeah, so we can work with that to figure it out. Just keep me informed about the plans and I'll just make sure we're covered.
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I think as long as you're CC'd on some of that correspondence to help us monitor.
That would be great.
Okay. Well, that's the update I had on, at least on the Preservation Month, part of that, but,
I'll also note, if I may, that Commissioner Cypher said she had, and this was a quick email that I think she sent while traveling, she had an education idea for an Instagram post about something, I don't know what, but so she's going to share that with me, and I'm going to share that with our social media person, and so that might be our first historic related, social media thing, which would be great, because that's one of the efforts that we have these tools available to us. It would be great to use it. And
Mhm.
so I appreciate her reaching out and thinking of something that we don't
Yeah.
know what it is yet, but
It'd be nice to change the algorithm of some of those posts
Mhm.
too, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
A little
Yes.
variety would be great.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll obviously share anything that gets posted with the group.
All right. Is there any other comments on the subcommittee groups at all? Anything general?
Nothing here.
Okay. And then our last agenda item, if there was any other staff or commissioner comments that we didn't get through tonight.
Just as staff, I will say that the next meeting is scheduled for May 5th. So mark that in your calendars. We will try to put it up on the meetings page
Mhm.
sooner rather than later, but
Right. Typically, we try to highlight that as a, as a public event as well, obviously for Preservation Month. So I think in the last few years, we probably haven't been tooting our horn too much about it, but and I know the city of Bend has done that pretty well. It's like, hey, everyone's invited if you want to see what a landmarks meeting looks like, or so we have in the past listed those actual meetings that fall in May as part of the part of our events. So
as long as there's no snow.
no snow. There better not be. All right. I think we're probably good for wrapping up tonight and getting home and staying warm. Unless there's any other comments that I would like to adjourn tonight's meeting, February 3rd. And we will we'll be in touch and we'll talk to you again in May.
Y'all be really safe driving home.
Yeah.
Okay.
But thanks for letting us know that you were going to be on Zoom. It's helpful for me.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.